Good evening and welcome to the special legislative session of the Town Board, November 20th, 2017. I'll officially call the meeting to order, and I'll ask that everyone please rise for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I'll ask our clerk to please call the roll.
Cole.
Here.
LaFountain.
Here.
Metzler.
Here.
Moore.
Here.
Quinn.
Here. First item on the agenda is communications and announcements. I'll first recognize the town clerk.
Thank you, Mr. Supervisor. This evening I received a voicemail from residents Mary and Clerk Russell. They would like to voice their support for the town board for approving the purchase of the Shadow Pines property.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Quinn?
Thank you, Mr. Supervisor. Good evening, everyone. On behalf of Supervisor LaFountain and my fellow board members, I'd like to read Supervisor LaFountain's column posted earlier today in case those in the audience or watching at home haven't had a chance to read it yet. As shared previously, there have been many moving parts and very compressed timelines for the proposed purchase of Shadow Pines. If you've been following this topic, you will recall that on September 29th, 2017, the Town Board signed a letter of intent for purchase and sale of real property Shadow Pines Golf Course with Dolomite Products Company, Inc. Since then, the town and Dolomite have been working to complete a purchase agreement based on the terms in the letter of intent. In addition, the town also completed a seeker environmental review for acquisition and is pursuing financing for the purchase. That leads us to tonight's Town Board special legislative session to vote on bond resolutions to finance the purchase of Shadow Pines property for $3,650,000 from Dolomite. The property will be used for governmental and/or public uses as determined by the Town Board in the future. The Town Board's original intent was to conduct a public referendum, a straight-up or down vote by residents, on the purchase of the Shadow Pines property. However, in the current draft of the purchase agreement, Dolomite requires a closing date of no later than January 31st, 2018, and Dolomite's legal counsel has informed the town that Dolomite will not consider an extension of the closing date beyond January 31st. Dolomite's position does not allow the town sufficient time to conduct a public referendum, which can take 60 to 75 days. With the public referendum option taken away, the Town Board chose an alternative path forward with bond resolutions tonight that, according to New York state law, are subject to a permissive referendum. A permissive referendum is a legislative tool in which a board's decision stands unless it is challenged by citizen petition for a public referendum, in which case the board is obligated to conduct a public referendum. With respect to the purchase of the Shadow Pines property, if the bond resolution should pass tonight, Penfield residents who prefer a formal public referendum on the purchase may petition and obligate the Town Board to hold a public referendum. Residents who support the bond resolution alternative have no formal action to take as the resolutions being proposed by the Town Board work towards that outcome. For those residents who prefer that the Town Board hold a public referendum, New York State has specific rules and procedures for this process. Residents who want to pursue a petition for a public referendum are required by law to engage in a process that requires 5% of Penfield voters who voted in the 2014 gubernatorial election to sign a petition calling for a public referendum. The numbers for that are 5% of 13,683 voters, which would require a minimum of 685 qualified signatures. Petitions must follow a specific format and be submitted to the town clerk within 30 days following the adoption of tonight's resolutions. Should the purchase of Shadow Pines property occur, the financing of the purchase will cost the average household valued at $190,000, approximately an additional $11 a year in town taxes over 30 years. Additional ownership costs would depend on future use and maintenance requirements. In 2016, the majority of the moratorium committee recommended that the town of Penfield purchase the Shadow Pines property. The Penfield Town Board considered the recommendation and felt strongly that the Shadow Pines property was worth bringing into town ownership for municipal uses rather than allowing it to be developed under its current residential zoning. Thank you very much.
Mrs. Messer?
I have nothing this evening.
Okay. Mr. Moore?
No communications tonight.
Okay.
Thank you.
Ms. Cole? All right. Move on to public participation. 3 ways to do that. If you're here in the audience, you can address the board on any matter at the podium. You can call in at 340-8771, or you can log on at penfield.org. And I'll ask our clerk, has anyone signed up? And if you didn't, that's okay. No mad rush to the table. We'll then get to you after we get to our folks that signed up initially. So with that,
Neil Madden.
welcome, Neil.
Mr. Supervisor, members of the board, members of the audience, and anyone who might be listening or watching at home. My name's Neil Madden. I live at 10 Park Place in the town of Penfield. My wife and I have been town residents for 33 years, and we've been a Penfield School District residents for 44 years. And I was a member of the moratorium committee. I've sent several Freedom of Information requests to the town last week, and this morning I sent a message to the supervisor referencing a section of the so-called open meetings law, which I thought required or mandated the town to provide copies of tonight's proposed resolutions to me prior to the meeting. So, you know, it's been a busy afternoon. I received the supervisor's column, several Freedom of Information responses, and the proposed resolutions for tonight. So prior to that, I'd prepared some comments for this portion of the public participation, just to say I was curious and somewhat concerned about, from my perspective, the town board seemed to be in such a super accelerated process moving ahead on Shadow Pines. And furthermore, that I thought that process over the last few months, at least to my view, had the effect of avoiding public notice and participation or minimizing it. So my curiosity on that front was piqued by several executive sessions of the board, for which no minutes are kept, several special meetings, including one the day after election. At last week's legislative meeting, a resolution was adopted which never appeared on the agenda. No copy was provided, as is the usual town practice. So I may come back to some of those concerns that led me to what I thought I would talk about at this moment, maybe in the second participation area. But hey, now I know what the board proposes to do tonight, adopt these 2 bond resolutions. And the chairman's column, which came out sometime this afternoon, in a sense, it's not a surprise to me the board wants to take action on the financing resolutions. The shocking part to me is the proposition that there won't be a public referendum unless a petition is filed by 700 and some odd people or more, 685 or more voters. This is shocking to me because this is directly contrary to several written representations made by the supervisor, and I believe the intent of the board all along. It's also, I see it as a breach of faith with the voters of the town. Again, on those letters, the supervisor wrote to members of the committee on February 8th of this year, December 12th of last year, October 25th of last year, indicating that at all times there would be a referendum. Now, the proposed rationale for what I consider a breach of faith to take this to the voters is that Dolomite insists upon a closing by January 31. And what your letter indicated, or your column, Tony, said in the latest draft of the purchase agreement. This is an aside, but I haven't seen any resolution of the board approving any final purchase agreement, and perhaps there's a logic to say, first we should authorize having enough money to buy the property, and then we'll sign a final binding purchase agreement. Now, I just find that this deadline proposed by Dolomite, and this is the reason we cannot have a referendum in this matter, it doesn't add up. First of all, there are more than 60 days between this date and January 31st. There's 62 days. Second, I can't believe that the town, if this is something that Dolomite is insisting upon, that you're going to just roll over and play dead on that. The moratorium's in effect until March 31st. You could extend the moratorium. It's within your authority to do so, whether that's wise or not. So, this whole proposition that, we have to do this by January 31st really reminds me of, maybe reminds others who've had this experience of kind of the worst purchase experience you ever had at a high-pressure car dealership. Doesn't seem to me this is befitting of a town of planned progress. Now, your letter, the supervisor's column says, hey, there isn't enough time, so we just have to wait on a petition to be filed. And I guess if you really are serious that January 31 is a magic date, by the time a notice goes out, if in fact 685 people file it, you couldn't have a referendum before January 31st, and the opportunity that many people are interested in would be lost as a matter of timing. I don't think the board wants to put itself in that position. And the fact of the matter, I mentioned that there is more than 60 days as we stand here right now before January 31st. The board also, I'm sure, is aware of Section 94 of the town law, which says, and I'll quote, and it's on this topic of having a referendum. It says, the town board, upon its own motion, may cause to be submitted to the electors any act or resolution of such board against which a petition could be filed as provided in this chapter. And the proceedings thereon, the referendum shall be as specified, shall be the same as if the petition had been filed in accordance with the provisions of this chapter. So I think this board has the authority under Section 94 of the town law to say, look, we're passing this bond resolution, we're going to have a referendum. I think there's time enough to do it, and I appreciate receiving late in the day the proposed resolutions, and I'll be specific. And that is, if you look at those resolutions, having said that, it'd be nice if I found them readily. Oh, here they are. You have two separate resolutions. A bond resolution to borrow $260,000 for the Clerk house and some land around it, about 6 acres. And the second resolution, a little steeper resolution to borrow $3,390,000 for the rest of Shadow Pines. In each case, if you went to Section 11 of your resolution, and this was, of course, the section that in the drafts that says, well, this is subject to a permissive referendum and blah, blah, blah. But if you deleted everything after the first sentence, there's a couple more sentences. These are the sentences that say, hey, we're going to put a notice out in the next 10 days, telling the voters if they so would choose, and if enough of them file a petition, we'll have to have a referendum. So I think if you deleted the everything after the first sentence and replaced it with the following, this could be better craftsmanship or draftsmanship, but I think if you replaced it with the following, the town board, pursuant to town law section 94, hereby resolves and directs that these resolutions shall hereby be submitted to a vote of the electors to be held on blank. And I think you got enough time to actually, you could put in January 30 there if you, again, want to kowtow or, go along with this ultimatum, buy it now, from Dolomite. If you haven't signed a definitive final purchase agreement, I think you just got to have that conversation again with Dolomite. As I say, I don't think they're going to be damaged, because I doubt there's anybody out there with $3.6 million, a check that they're going to deliver on February 1st. And as I pointed out, you really have got the referendum in effect until March 31st. So I guess this portion of my public participation is I really call on the board to keep faith with the voters, to provide for a referendum that doesn't require the voters to run around and get petitions between now and just prior to Christmas. That seems to me to be in everyone's interest. Otherwise, it seems to me, well, quite frankly, I mean, I don't know how to say this any other way, in addition to that kind of car dealer, buy it this minute or, you don't get a good deal. Look, the board has had several special meetings, executed this letter of intent September 29. It just doesn't pass my personal smell test that you are saying there is no way we can have a referendum when Section 94 of the town law gives you that opportunity, even if you're constrained by some, I think, artificial January 31 deadline. I know I disagreed with the recommendation of many other members of the moratorium committee. I don't need to belabor that, but I just think it's in everyone's interest, and the only proper thing to do is to keep faith with the voters and put this up to a referendum for a yes or a no vote. Thank you very much. I will come back, the second part of the public participation.
And you can come back this part of public participation once we've gone through all those first-time speakers.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you, Neil. Our
Sam.
second, sorry.
Sam Ogie.
Hi, Sam.
Good evening, Supervisor LaFountain and the rest of the town board. I'd like to start off just by thanking you for having the foresight over a year and a half ago, I guess maybe almost going on 2 years ago, to put the moratorium in place and provide for the opportunity for the town to be heard on this topic. Listening to the previous speaker tonight in public participation, one might get the idea that there wasn't very much public participation in this decision, and I think that's very far from the truth. I think it's worthwhile to remember that there were a series of meetings when the moratorium was being discussed and after the moratorium was put in place, and that there was quite a lot of public participation, and that public participation ran 10 to 1 or 20 to 1 in favor of purchasing shadow pines. Then when the moratorium committee was in place, there was no other information to suggest that the sentiment of the town had changed. So I think it's important that we all remember that there has been significant public participation to this point. Second thing that I would just like to point out, and I understand that the town board might feel it's not appropriate for the town board to talk about the impact on the schools, since Penfield Central School District is not under control of the town board. But that does leave Supervisor LaFountain's letter appearing to be a little bit one-sided on the cost. If the town buys the property, certainly there will be a town cost impact. But if the town doesn't buy the property, there will be a school district cost impact, which is not reflected in that letter. We were told during the moratorium committee meetings by the leadership of Penfield Central School District that they had seen a plan from Ryan Homes to put 255 homes on that property. We were also told that the school district averages 1.2 children per house, and that actually it might be going up from there. So that means we're looking at about 300 additional students in the Penfield School District. Some analysis that I and other moratorium committee members undertook suggested that that would increase school district taxes by about $1 million per year, as compared to purchasing this property for 3.3. And the important thing to remember is this purchase, the bonds term out at some point. If you add those houses, that's a perpetuity of children in the school district. So you're talking about perhaps $1 million a year in perpetuity versus 3.3 million or 3.6 million to purchase this property. So I think people who are listening tonight need to be aware of that in fact, a fair analysis and a reasonable analysis suggests that it's actually cheaper for residents of the school district to pay an increase in town taxes, if that is what might be required in order to buy the property and to avoid increases in central school district taxes. So again, thank you very much for having the foresight to take this process and provide the opportunity for the town to speak on the issue. And we should all remember that the town has spoken very clearly that they prefer that the Shadow Pines be purchased and kept for municipal use. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. Our next speaker?
That's all I had at the time.
Okay. Others. Dave Woodward, please. Welcome, Dave.
Hello, Dave Woodward, 1530 Harris Road. I have to agree with Sam as far as some of the costs, the impact it would be long-term. I think it's a good investment on this town, you know, in buying this property. I think it's a fair price, and I think that there would be people readily available to buy that property at the kind of money that the town is looking at purchasing. And I think that they have tried to keep people informed. I would have hoped that the Penfield School District would have waited a little bit longer as far as them looking at sites to build their new bus garage, which is not even within their school district, and which I don't think a lot of the Penfield residents know that they have one planned on Plank Road in the Webster School District. And that, I think, is a bigger disservice as far as not letting the public know about that as far as from the school district. But I do think that purchasing this is a good long-term investment for the town. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Other speakers? Tim, and then Katie. Tim?
Good evening, Town Board. Tim Murphy, 48 Corral Drive. I'm going to reference my notes. I didn't have a lot of time to prepare, but I wrote down a few questions after reading this morning's letter. And first of all, I just want to say I support the action for the town to go ahead and buy the property. But we know that one of the alternative motives is to keep high development or high density development out of there. Also, all the truck traffic, all the blasting that happens there, possible brownfield issues. This really makes that a wild card. The quarry in the middle of all this, and I don't think it's gotten enough conversation based on what I've listened to during this process. So just wanted to go on record with that. But I have a few questions. And again, it's just reading the supervisor's letter from this morning. So again, just picked up on a couple of inconsistencies. So there's references to governmental and or public uses on the first page, and on the back page it's municipal uses. Is there a difference, and can you explain what those are?
There really isn't any difference, Tim. You know, government uses, municipal uses are one and the same. You know, be used, you know, for Town of Penfield.
Okay, thank you. That's what I assumed, but again,
Yep.
I wasn't sure. And again, in my mind, that means...
That's an error on my part of just a consistency from page 1 to page 2.
And I wasn't looking to point that out, just trying to make sure I get my head
No, I
wrapped around this. And again, so then I jumped to the conclusion that that means no development in terms of big homes or mixed use, et cetera. But again, for clarification, there's 2 resolutions tonight, as referenced before, one for 260K and a second one for the balance. Why is there 2? Why is the Clark House separated from the rest of the golf course?
The easy answer is that you amortize those properties over different timelines. So the Clark House and the buildings associated with that would be amortized over 15 years. The rest of the property would be amortized over 30 years. And if you put a blended rate together, then that works out to be something a little less than 30 years.
Great. Good answer. I didn't think about the value of the house. And just from my understanding, again, just watching this process, the town board is not bound by the recommendations of the moratorium committee. I mean, it didn't go to any kind of resolution. So those 3 recommendations that were clearly made by the moratorium committee, the town board going forward for whatever the use of this property is not bound by those recommendations. Is that correct?
So that is the easy answer is yes, that is correct. But again, the intent of purchasing this property is for municipal use, not to be a developer, not to sell off property, not to get into the development business.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
I will also say it isn't the intent of this board to open a restaurant either.
Got it. So the last sentence in the letter says, under its current residential zoning. Is there any intention to change the zoning of this property in the future?
That's been part of the discussion that this board has had as it relates to the comprehensive plan. And I know we're a bit behind in getting that kicked off. The intent was to try to get that kicked off in October, and just a number of other things have come up. I won't say that it's not important, but certainly has been something that has needed the attention of this board. So our goal still is, as part of that, when we charge the comprehensive plan team, is to take a look at all those properties, Shadow Pines, Shadow Lake, and also Penfield Country Club.
So thank you for that. You actually segued into my next question, but just so I understand then, so there is an intent now, but the Comprehensive Master Plan Committee will look at that as a whole.
That is correct.
Because looking back at the 2010, which I was a contributor to, there was a miss. For example, the quarry wasn't on the map for land use. Okay, so yes, I did bring the timeline that was published. It really made me feel good when I saw this out there. But then I looked and I couldn't find any references to any of the meetings that were stated on here. There's a public information meeting scheduled for this month. And it just in my mind, I saw it as critical to support this whole effort.
So that ball is in my court to get that updated. That's one of the items that is sitting on my desk. And I'll be looking to have that updated on the website probably right after the holidays, after the Thanksgiving holidays.
So Mr. Supervisor, just, has the committee been selected yet?
Absolutely not, no.
Okay. So we're still in early days.
That is correct.
But we all agree that it's an important part of all of this going forward.
Absolutely. Like so many things we do, yes.
Thank you, Tony. So the one other thing that I was looking at the resolutions from the last few weeks, Local Law 3 of 2017 about mixed use, that was, I assume, adopted.
That is correct.
So that speaks specifically about some unique ways to use property, specifically in the 250 corridor.
That is correct.
Could you imagine that being applied to this parcel?
I hadn't even thought about that, Tim, but is that something that's possible? I will not totally rule that out, but again, I just remind you, the intent of the board looking to acquire this property is for general municipal uses. Again, we're not in the development business. We're not looking to sell that property off. We're not looking to open a restaurant or anything like that.
But again, it's me projecting forward. I'm imagining what options are out there and acquiring the land and maybe selling off some of it to fund that or to pay it off and to generate tax revenue going forward, and maybe keeping the backside of the golf course as open space. Again, it goes in my mind, and it's worth stating, is like, it just seems like you folks would have a plan, and that's one of the options out in front of us. So unrealistic to expect it to be totally green space?
Again, we're looking at the acquisition of the property at this point. We have not even sat down to talk about all the uses that we could put on that particular piece of property.
So thank you for that. And just my last comment, and
Sure.
I believe I sent you a note on this. I was riding my bicycle down to the Penfield Fitness Center this summer, and I think it was 9:23 in the morning. I almost got shooken off my bike by the blasting. Coming home at 10:53 that same day, the same thing almost happened. In my mind, the quarry is the wild card in all of this. That big open hole in the future, and any possible issues that are there now needs to be considered in this whole initiative.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It's part of the comprehensive plan, no question about it.
Thank you, Mr. Supervisor.
Thanks, Tim. Thank you. Katie? Welcome, Kate.
Thank you, sir. Kate McCardle, 15 Hillside Road. Thank you, Supervisor LaFountain and the Town Board, for all of your work on this effort. To echo Mr. Ogie and some other sentiment, we're really appreciative of the incredible work that you have put in as a board and as leadership for this effort, and obviously I support the decision to keep this land undeveloped. A couple of concerns. One, like Mr. Ogie said, as a member of the Cobble School District and on behalf of the school district, we have significant crowding in our schools, and we recognize what a possible development would do for our school district. My child that's sitting right over there, who's a 6-year-old at Cobbles, has a classroom of 27 or 28, and they're really having a difficult time right now. So it's good to hear that that is something that the board is addressing, and again, thank you for that. It's concerning to me, as a resident that tries to pay attention to what's going on in the town, that I was taken aback by the decision today. I've been trying to pay attention and read as much as I can and stay in the loop as a busy mom, working mom. So it's a big concern to us when we feel as residents that we're not communicated with. And I think transparency is an important issue. So to feel like this happened overnight to some of us, we recognize from your perspective, you've been working on it for many months now, so it didn't feel overnight to you. I would urge the board moving forward with this process to communicate as much as you can to residents. I know many residents that I was speaking to, I couldn't give them a clear answer of where the board was at after having almost 2 years of going through this process. So I would just urge you to communicate as much as you can. Also, Mr. LaFountain, you referenced in response to Mr. Murphy's question, I recognize and I hear you when you say you're not in the business of development and you're looking for the municipal needs, which we appreciate, and we hear you say that, and it makes, I think, all of us in the room feel a little bit better for the folks that want green space. What's concerning is having a town of planned progress and hearing you say that there's no specific plans for what that land will be, when you've heard over many, many months all of the ideas from residents that volunteered their time on that committee, and you've had a lot of people spending a lot of their personal time and volunteer time to provide the board with some options. I don't think saying that you don't have any ideas is an appropriate answer. I think you have plenty of ideas.
We do have plenty of ideas, yes.
Plenty of options. So I think being a little bit more clear with your answers so that we understand as residents that there are a lot of options that you're looking at and that you're moving forward and will communicate those things to residents would be helpful to us trying to support the town and your leadership. That's it for comments. Again, thank you. To round it out, I'm, of course, supportive of this action purchasing the land, and I hope that we'll have better communication in the future.
Great, thank you. Jeff Burns?
Can you check with Dave Ryder? Apparently the TV feed flipped over to the Webster.
Hi, I'm Jeff Burns, 39 Scarborough Park, and I also support the decision of the board to have a vote to purchase this property. And I wanted to speak to the discussion of what the value of this is to the town. And first thing I would say is that my understanding is that in the past, the town has purchased development rights to various pieces of property in the town, mostly on the west side, and that the average cost per acre, and maybe you can correct me or come up with a better number than this, my understanding is the number was about $20,000 to $25,000 per acre, and that was just for the development rights of various properties when we had the open space bond money that was being used. And here we, at that basis, this property would cost over $4 million. And there, so $4 million is for a similar piece of property on the west side, and we'd only have the development rights. Here we're talking about $3.6 million, and we would own the property. So it's an excellent value in comparison to what we've done for open space in other parts of town. Another point I would make is that it's well documented, and there's a lot of there are a lot of metrics to support this, that open space can help increase property value in a town. It makes a town more attractive to people who are moving here, makes it more attractive to people who live here. It improves quality of life. And of course, as other people have discussed, it's going to reduce the alternative traffic and noise and pollution that we would have if that area was developed. And then the third area is that there was a bond issue for open space back in the early 2000s, I don't know, year 2000 or whatever, and that's almost paid off. So once that is paid off, even with this new open space bond, our open space expenditures for the town will be greatly reduced compared to what we're paying now. We had a $10 million bond that's almost paid off, and here we'll have a $3.6 million bond. So the cost to the taxpayer will actually be lower within a few years for open space. And then the fourth thing I would say is the long-term value for the town to own this property. We all know that the quarry is operating long past the end of life that had been mentioned in various permits in the past, back in the 1980s. And I understand that those get extended and that there's, additional life that can be found. But eventually, who knows when, maybe 10 years, 25 years, 50 years, whatever it is, eventually that quarry will be at its end of life, it will close, and as someone else mentioned, we'll have a big open hole in the ground. And that hole can either be a liability to the town and dangerous, or it can be a wonderful asset. And I think this is a very small investment to help ensure that for the future of Penfield, that we have a wonderful asset there. And by owning the land next to the quarry, we'll have greater options to perhaps reorient things there a little bit and give room so that grading could be done and that there could be an appropriate slope for the future lake that will be there. And that lake, my understanding, will be over 150 acres. Now, this is a lake that I like to visit in New Hampshire quite often. This lake is beautiful, and it's wonderful. Very, very nice place to go. This is only 23 acres. So our town could have a lake that's 7 times bigger than this. And if we plan this properly and we own the property that's nearby and we work with with Dolomite, we could also have a beautiful lake in the center of town with many, many different options that would really enhance the quality of life and could offer different ways of doing smart planning and potential mixed use perhaps, or open space for parts of it, and recreation for other parts. So there would be a lot of options. So I think I appreciate what the board is doing, and I support your commitment to looking to the long term and really looking at what the opportunity is here. And I think it's an investment that would be extremely well spent. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Is there anyone else? Yes, Bob.
Good evening. Bob Peterson from 1931 Clark Road. I think I agree with everybody. I'm in favor of the town board approving the resolution, and the speakers ahead of me, with the possible exception of Neil, have said everything so well that I don't need to repeat it. I just had one question, Tony. You mentioned you didn't want to be in the restaurant business. Does that mean you would be opposed to leasing it to a restaurant operator or a wedding business if somebody wanted to come in there and redo the barn, for instance?
Certainly, that would be something that the board would take a look at that, and I think we talked about that even early on, that, you know, it's a pretty unique building, the Clark House itself. It's set up for a restaurant and has been a restaurant for many, many years, and the way it, even though it's a local designated landmark, not on the state register, but on the local register, the state also recognizes that it was used for commercial purposes and what have you. So
that's
I
still
think
enough.
I think we've said all along, you know, that's something that the town board would take a look to see what some of those options might be for that.
Great, thank you.
Yep, absolutely. Thanks, Bob. Anybody else that'd like to address the board? Again, yep, Neil? Hold on, Neil, just a minute. Let me see, just any first-time speakers? Yes, sir. And we'll get through the first time, and then you'll have the second time, and then also at the end of the meeting as well. Welcome.
Hi, my name is Mike Tui. I live at 60 Canyon Trail, and I would just like to thank the board and the committee members who have worked on the issue, and I'd like to express my support for the vote.
Great, thank you, Mike. Thank you for stopping in. Okay, anyone else, any first-time speakers? All right, Neil, second time.
Thank you, Mr. Supervisor, and I don't want to belabor it. I guess sitting there, I kind of think of, in my generation, there was a lot of people going around in the 60s and 70s talking about give peace a chance. So give peace a chance was kind of a common refrain. So, you know, clearly there are a lot of people in support of going forward with the town purchasing Shadow Pines. My point tonight is, why don't we give the people of the entire town a chance to vote on this matter, on borrowing this money to implement the purchase. Let's give the people a chance to vote on it. That's what has been promised. That's what has always happened in the past. And I think there is a clear legal vehicle, Section 94 of the town law, that says, right tonight, change a couple of sentences around in each of these resolutions, and rather than pushing it off on the population at large to run around, file petitions in the right form, in the right size paper, why don't you do what is the right thing to do, which is, if the town taxpayers are going to be asked to pay for these funds over a long period of time, and not arguing the merits of the matter, I think it's only appropriate to present it to the voters in a referendum. You can do it under Section 94 with a few amendments, so I would urge the board just to make those tweaks to the proposed resolutions so this matter goes forward to a referendum. That's really it. I would hope even people in favor of the project have no objection to having the voters decide this matter. That's my pitch.
Okay.
Thank you again.
Thank you, Neil. Bill?
Bill Sullivan, 1899 Clark Road. I'm obviously an immediate neighbor and probably know the property as well as anybody here. My dominant concern, if that property were to become heavily populated, the danger associated with that property. I've just got a couple of questions. Have you been to the quarry?
So we're not, yeah, Bill, we're not going to get
Okay.
into a debate back and
Okay.
forth.
Okay.
The discussion is between residents and ourselves.
That is an incredibly dangerous environment, particularly for children. I have spent 25 years watching that situation. I believe that it isn't the best thing necessarily to have the entire population vote on something that very, very, very few of them understand how critically dangerous that is to have any housing. We all know, of course, that that golf course is there because the quarry understood that they had to have a buffer between the quarry and any housing. That is the reason that the golf course was put there. I have read many, many years the monthly reports from the DEC down on down below, and they indicate that there has to be a buffer land between them and the blasting zones that go off. Now, you all know the blasting is a function of the height of the where the blasting occurs. If it occurs 300 feet down below, it's not serious. But if it's on the top row, as it has to happen sooner or on a regular basis, the blasting is incredibly loud and disruptive, and I believe would preclude anybody building within a very large distance away from that area. It would be harmful in many, many different ways. So I support what the town is doing. I believe this is the right and the best thing. God bless you, and let's get on with it. You can sell it to a developer that wants to make money on the property, but if you do that, just understand the incredible dangerous responsibility that you have. The developer themselves have very little. This is a developer. He just sells the lots off. Somebody has to be concerned about the safety of the environment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bill. Any other speakers? First time? Second time? Third time?
I think, Mr. Supervisor, if I
Sure.
may, just quickly, you had mentioned on multiple occasions just right now that this property is for general governmental or municipal use, and I think from my understanding of New York State law, should the town purchase and own this land, I think it's a more tedious process to actually sell it. Public alienation is, I believe, requires action by the New York State Legislature. So, again, there's no intent of any of us to do anything other than have this in town holdings. So I just want to, alleviate that concern. And just one other brief thing that I think just needs to be clarified. I would not be opposed to a public referendum if we had the ability to do so. The January 31st deadline is for a closing date, which means we have to have the money available. We don't have the luxury, unfortunately, under the current deadline imposed upon us to hold a public referendum and take the chance that we may not be able to close. So I just think that it's important to know that where we are right now in the negotiations, and we're still continuing our negotiations in good faith, but this is the option available to us in order to secure the necessary financing that we do need to purchase this land. Thank you.
Thank you. Bob Peterson.
Something Rob Quinn said. I had the understanding from the work we did in the moratorium committee, this question came up about alienation. I understood the town was buying the property for general purpose use and not committing it to parkland. Doesn't that make a difference in terms of requiring the alienation rules, which has to go to the state of New York for approval, the legislative approval?
Yes.
So
Point is well taken.
what we're proposing is to keep the property in the town's ownership as general purpose use,
That is
not
correct.
not
Not as a
specifically
park.
as parkland.
Right. Not specifically as a
Right,
parkland.
thank you.
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you.
Yep. Other questions, comments, speakers? Okay. Move on. Again, there will be another opportunity at the end of the agenda if anyone would like to comment on it as well. Move on to additions and deletions to the agenda. Is there any additions or deletions to the agenda this evening? Seeing none. We do have the minutes of November 1st before us, and would entertain a motion of approval for those minutes.
I move that the minutes of November 1st be approved.
I'll second.
Been moved and seconded. Any discussion on those minutes? Seeing no discussion, I'd ask for a roll call vote, please.
Cole?
Aye.
LaFountain?
Aye.
Metzler?
Aye.
Moore?
Aye.
Quinn?
Aye.
5 ayes.
Petitions. Has the town board, town clerk, or town attorney received any petitions since their last get-together?
No.
Okay, again, seeing none. Before we move on to the actual resolutions by function, I'd like to recognize Councilman Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Supervisor. Just real quick, I just would like to make a technical correction to the two resolutions. The resolution 211 and 212 on the agenda are correct, and all that needs to be done is it's just a numbering correction, administrative correction, that 211 on the actual resolution becomes 212, and 212 on the actual resolution becomes 211. So it's just an administrative correction on the numbering of the resolutions. The content of the resolution does not change.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Moore. With that, I'll recognize our clerk to read under Law and Finance Resolution 211.
Bond resolution of the Town Board of the Town of Penfield, Monroe County, New York, the quote-unquote town, authorizing the town to undertake the acquisition of an approximately 6-acre parcel of land located at 1960 Clark Road within the town, stating the maximum estimated cost thereof is $260,000, appropriating said amount therefore, and authorizing the issuance of up to $260,000 in serial bonds of the town to finance said appropriation.
Moved.
Second.
Whereas the Town Board of the Town of Penfield, Monroe County, proposes to authorize the issuance of up to $260,000 in serial bonds of the town to finance the acquisition of approximately 6-acre parcel of land and buildings and improvements situated, including, without limitation, the Clark House located at 1960 Clark Road within the town, constituting a portion of the site of the former Shadow Pines Golf Club, collectively called the Project, at an estimated maximum cost of $260,000. Whereas by resolution dated October 11, 2017 and November 15, 2017, the Town Board determined that the actions to be undertaken that include the project, collectively the action, constitutes a Type 1 action pursuant to the provisions of the New York State Environmental Quality Review Act, known as SEQR, and the regulations promulgated thereunder, 6 NYCRR Part 617, collectively SEQR. The town assumed lead agency status for the purposes of conducting a review of the action for purposes of SEQR. The Town Board determined that the action will not result in any significant adverse environmental impacts, adopted a negative declaration pursuant to SEQR with respect thereto, and directed at the notice of negative declaration to be filed and published to the extent required under SEQR, and that the requirement of SEQR with respect to the action have been satisfied. Whereas the Town Board now wishes to appropriate funds for the project and to authorize issuance of the town's serial bonds and bonds anticipation notes to be issued to finance the aforementioned specific object or purpose. Now therefore be it resolved that the Town Board of the Town of Penfield, by the favorable vote of not less than 2/3 of all members of such body, as follows. Section 1. The town is hereby authorized to undertake the acquisition of an approximately 6 acres of land and buildings and improvements situated including without limitation the Clark House located at 1960 Clark Road within the town, constituting a portion of the site of the former Shadow Pines Golf Club for such future governmental and/or public use or uses that shall hereinafter be determined by the town board from time to time. It is hereby determined that the maximum estimated cost of aforementioned specific object or purpose, including all preliminary, ancillary, and related costs thereto, and the financing thereof, is $260,000. Said amount is hereby appropriated, therefore, and plan for the financing thereof shall consist of the issuance of $260,000 in serial bonds of the town authorized to be issued pursuant to this resolution, or bond anticipation notes issued in anticipation of such bonds, and unless paid for from other sources, the levy and collection of taxes on all taxable real property of the town, to pay the principal of such bonds or notes and the interest thereon as the same become due and payable. Mr. Supervisor, I just would like to, for the record, mention that there are there's 11 other sections to this. Seems like there's a lot of legal language involved in this, as I just read. Thank you.
Thank you. Discussion. Seeing no discussion, I'd ask for a roll call vote, please.
Cole.
Aye.
LaFountain.
Aye.
Metzler.
Aye.
Moore.
Aye.
Quinn.
Aye.
5 ayes. Bond resolution of the Town Board of the Town of Penfield, Monroe County, New York, the quote-unquote town, authorizing the town to undertake the acquisition of 3 parcels of land containing in the aggregate approximately 206 acres located at 745 Wayland Road, 2701 Atlantic Avenue, and 1950 Clark Road within the town, stating the maximum estimated cost thereof is $3,390,000, appropriating said amount therefore, and authorizing the issuance of up to $3,390,000 in serial bonds of the town to finance said appropriation.
Moved.
Second.
This resolution is basically worded the same, just a different dollar amount and a different parcel number. So a lot of what I just said I will be repeating based on the resolution that I just read. Whereas the Town Board of the Town of Penfield, Monroe County, New York, proposes to authorize the issuance of up to $3,390,000 in serial bonds of the town to finance the acquisition of 3 parcels of land containing in the aggregate approximately 206 acres located at 745 Wayland Road, 2701 Atlantic Avenue, and 1950 Clark Road within the town. Whereas by resolution dated October 11, 2017 and November 15, 2017, the Town Board determined that the action and actions to be undertaken that include the project collectively called the action constitutes a Type 1 action pursuant to the provisions under the New York State Environmental Quality Review Act, known as SEQR, and the regulations promulgated thereunder. The Town Board assumed lead agency status for purposes of conducting a review of the action for the purpose of SEQR. The Town Board determined that the action will not result in any significant adverse environmental impacts, adopted a negative declaration pursuant to SEQR. Whereas the Town Board now wishes to appropriate funds for the project and to authorize the issuance of the town's serial bonds and bond anticipation notes to be issued to finance an aforementioned specific object or purpose. Now therefore be it resolved that the Town Board of the Town of Penfield, by the favorable vote of not less than 2/3 of all members of such body, as follows. Section 1. The town is hereby authorized to undertake the acquisition of 3 parcels of land containing an aggregate approximately 206 acres located at 745 Wayland Road, 1701 Atlantic Avenue, and 1950 Clark Road within the town, constituting a portion of the site formerly known as the Shadow Pines Golf Club for such future governmental and/or public use or uses as shall hereinafter be determined by the Town Board from time to time. It is hereby determined that the maximum estimate cost after aforementioned specific object or purpose, including all preliminary and related costs thereto, and the financing thereof of $3,390,000 Said amount is hereby appropriated, therefore, and the plan for the financing, therefore, shall consist of the issuance of $3,390,000 in serial bonds of the town authorized to be issued pursuant to this resolution, or bond anticipation notes issued in anticipation of such bonds, and unless paid for from other sources, the levy and collection of taxes on all taxable real property of the town to pay the principal of such bonds or notes and the interest thereon as the same become due and payable. And for the record, Mr. Supervisor, there are roughly 12 other sections. Again, it's legal language pursuant to this resolution. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Discussions on this resolution.
If I can, Mr. Supervisor, just kind of want to touch base on a couple things. I'd like to take a few minutes to just kind of outline the actions of this board over the last couple weeks and our efforts to move forward with the purchase of the Shadow Pines property. And we've had 4 different town board meetings, all open to the public and televised on cable access, and we passed different resolutions to get us to where we are today. A resolution such as hiring an engineer to perform the required and mandated Phase 1 environmental review and to provide the Seeker State Environment Quality Review Act assistance. Resolutions to hire bond counsel and environmental counsel. Resolutions to hire a financial consultant for bonding for the purchase of the property. To hire a real estate attorney for the purchase and contract negotiation for the Shadow Pines property. And to adopt a negative declaration for the acquisition of Shadow Pines, which is a part of the seeker process mandated to the town. Since we first learned of the sale of the Shadow Pines property and the possible development of near 290 homes as originally advertised, I have opposed a massive residential development on the Shadow Pines parcel. I can say that today my conviction stands just as strong. A massive 250 to 290, however you want to look at it, residential development located at this property is not in the best interest of the town. It would significantly alter the character of this part of Penfield, along with dramatic negative impacts to traffic, infrastructure, and the cost of our schools. In a perfect world, we would have the time to hold a public referendum on the purchase of this property. But it is clear that Dolomite and Oldcastle wants a purchase to be completed or closed in a time frame by January 31st that is legally difficult, if not impossible, for us or any municipality to meet the legal time requirements needed to hold a public referendum and secure bond financing. I hope that during our continued negotiations with Dolomite and Oldcastle, they embrace the concept of being a good neighbor and allow some flexibility with their imposed January 31st deadline to close on the sale. This only makes sense given that the moratorium extends until March 31st anyways. I support this process moving forward as the next best option, and I will be supporting this resolution this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Other questions, other comments? Excuse me.
I have a few comments, Mr. Supervisor. Certainly, I agree with what Councilman Moore has said. I also think about a quote often when we're deliberating. It actually comes from the law of the Iroquois, and it's somewhat ironic given that we're talking about Shadow Pines, that in every deliberation, we must consider the impact on the 7th generation, even if it requires having skin as thick as the bark of a pine. And I thought about this today earlier, and I've thought about this as we've deliberated our actions this evening. Is this an ideal situation? No. Is it the preferred way to go about acquiring Shadow Pines? No. Was it a difficult decision to make for me? Absolutely not. The risk is too high to let this property go to anyone else but the town of Penfield. I believe the statements that have been made regarding how easy it would be to tweak a resolution or to hold a referendum show a lack of understanding of the all-hands-on-deck effort that have been taken upon in this town hall for several months. The all-hands-on-deck negotiations and discussions, debates, but at the end of the day, a clear, resounding resolve that
in the best interest of the town of Penfield, this property needs to be purchased by the town. We cannot afford to take the risk to have this purchased by anyone else. And to suggest that there is no one lining up at the door with a check to buy this property is absolutely not true. Without a doubt, they're lining up to buy this property. That's what happens when you live in a town where people want to live and where there's a quality of life that people want to enjoy. And that's another big reason why I'm supporting purchasing the property known as Shadow Pines, regardless of the legal way we have to do so. And so in that regard, Mr. Supervisor, I will support this resolution this evening. It is not preferred, but I am not willing to take the risk of going any other way.
Thank you. Further comments?
Oh, I support the resolutions, and it's very important to let everyone say, I appreciate all you coming here tonight, and the words Sam said stand out because, you know, I'm very involved with the open space referendum. And you learn what it could cost you if you don't buy it because of the schools and so on and that nature. It's very important that we don't have this massive development that was sort of hanging out there as a threat. And I believe that our town supervisor and our town attorney have spent so much time putting this together and all the resolutions that Councilman Moore mentioned. I mean, there's so many steps that you have to go to do this. We are very supportive of following through on this, and I wish we could do a public referendum because we always do that kind of thing. But it got to the fact that we can't. We don't have the time, and we feel it's so important to purchase this land. So I do support these resolutions, and it's very important to me as a resident, very important to me as a town board, and I appreciate all that our town attorney and town supervisor have done to get us to this point.
Thank you. Other comments, discussion?
Just briefly, Mr. Supervisor, I want to echo the sentiments of my colleagues. I think I do want to thank you, Mr. Supervisor, for your leadership on this throughout the process, the town attorney as well, and many members here in the town hall that have devoted so much time and capital and other resources over the last several months to meet all of the mandated timetables that we've had to negotiate, as well as continuing to negotiate in good faith with the seller of this property. So as Councilwoman Metzler said, this is a generational moment, I think, here for the town, and I certainly support this resolution and moving forward here in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Seeing no further comments, I would ask for a roll call vote of Resolution 212.
Cole.
Aye.
LaFountain.
Aye.
Metzler.
Aye.
Moore.
Aye.
Quinn.
Aye.
5 ayes.
Thank you. This brings us to old business. Any old business to come before the board this evening? Seeing none, is there any new business to come before the board this evening?
No.
Again, seeing none. This is the second opportunity for public participation. Is there anyone that would like to address the board? I see Mr. Peterson first, so
I do
Bob, if you...
actually, Town Supervisor, Neil Madden had requested prior to the meeting.
Peterson can go ahead.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you for that, Mrs. Steckloff. Mr. Peterson?
Yes, I hate to ask this question. I think it's a minor detail, but maybe it isn't. The moratorium committee submitted the final report around Labor Day a year ago. Was any formal action taken on the part of the board to accept that report? I know the board does business in terms of resolutions. Was there one? Did I miss it? Should there be an action taken by the board accepting that report or acknowledging its receipt?
So I think we did do that.
You did do
We
that,
did in
okay.
fact acknowledge the receipt of that, and that the board indicated that they would be looking at all the comments, thoughts, and recommendations
I
that were
apologize then. I
submitted. Nope,
looked
not a
at,
problem.
I checked the minutes for a couple of meetings after, and I didn't see it, my fault.
Okay, no,
Okay.
not a problem. Thank you, Bob. Neil?
Well, thank you again, Mr. Supervisor. Obviously, I'm very disappointed that the board would not make that amendment I proposed to these resolutions so that we could proceed with a referendum without putting the citizens who've been promised a referendum through the requirement of submitting petitions. And I guess, thinking back to quite a while ago when the first moratorium was passed, I think, again, given our motto of planned progress, I think we missed some opportunities there. I believe that the moratorium was, showed a lack of faith in your own processes. Over those 2 years that have passed, since almost 2 years have passed, we could have had a complete seeker review of a proposal that was allegedly in the woods or in the woodwork to come forth. We could have got data. We could have had a complete public process. Could have really determined and quantified impacts. Could have mitigated those impacts. And, one of the frustrations I had is participating in the moratorium committee was, we had a lot of input. We never had any input from any developer proposed development. Never had an opportunity to see what the pros and cons of that would be. And I realize, depending on your perspective, there are pros and cons of every possible alternative the town board might entertain, including buying this property with future details of how it might be used unclear at this time. So I'm disappointed. I think, again, it strikes me as really spitting in the face of the general public here in the town. Going back to the concerns I thought I would have tonight, and that was, and I think even one of the supporters of buying Shadow Pines mentioned, gee, it's been very difficult to find out what the town is up to, the board is up to, even if you're looking at the published agendas and et cetera, et cetera. And I think this is a concern. Process is so important. So I think over the past few months, you're very been very busy, but there's just been a lot of things that have proceeded in a way I think very inconsistent with an open process that you could all be proud of. Look, who knows? I know there were 6 executive sessions between August and October. No minutes are maintained of those because no decision is made, allegedly. How many of those involved discussions of, the process, the timelines, the options for Shadow Pines as a legal or real estate matter? I'll never know. Apparently, the supervisor signed a letter of intent to purchase Shadow Pines on 9/29. To date, and maybe I've just missed it, I found no town board resolution authorizing the execution of that letter of intent. I assume it's non-binding. Today, I received at about 4:50 p.m. a copy of that agreement, but prior to that, I don't think it's been on any website of the town. It's just surprising to me that if that letter of intent is outlining, the rules of the road going forward, that it wasn't put on the website, made available for the public. It's troublesome to me. Notices of special meetings of this board for October 11th, the November 8th, the day after election. Tonight's meeting, all of them none of them contained any agenda, just whatever will come before the board. No proposed resolutions were attached. This morning I sent an email to the supervisor suggesting that that's not a good practice. Probably, one could argue it's contrary to the Public Officers Law, Section 103E. The negative declaration, which was referenced, that occurred last week at the November 15th regular meeting of this board. The consistent practice of the town is that you can go to the website prior to the meeting, see the agenda, see the proposed draft of the proposed resolutions. Gee, strange. There's an agenda. Here's all these items. Here's all these resolutions. This seeker negative declaration resolution wasn't on the agenda, wasn't published ahead of time. How could anyone know this was going to be acted upon? And again, tonight I've already mentioned, there's this saying, hey, we can't even have, we don't have enough time to have a public hearing, public referendum, prior to a January 31 deadline, which may or may not exist. And I'm telling you, you do have the time. And I pointed out the section. And again, I put this all together. I don't think it's regardless of the merits of acquiring this property, this is not a proud moment for the town when you ignore the opportunity to get a little bit more time or use the 62 days you have right now to provide the public with what it was promised, which is an up or down vote at a public referendum. So, look, I guess going forward we'll see what happens. I guess I would inquire, so I assume the board still needs to adopt some resolution to authorize the execution of a final purchase agreement. And I guess, so at this point in time, do you know when that will be, and could you tell me?
I do not have the date for that. It is in active negotiations, and as soon as there is something that the board can act on, then we will look to bring that for resolution authorizing the supervisor to sign that. Again, provided that the board is comfortable with any and all conditions, obviously.
Yeah. And depending on the time of that, and again, I don't know if the board feels it has no choice but to accede to this January 31 closing deadline proposed by the seller, I would hope you would not feel so constrained, because it seems to me the more time there would be available for careful consideration of such an important matter would be in everyone's interest. And again, the moratorium is in effect till March 31st. I would hope you would reconsider at some future date this decision to not utilize town law, section 94, under your own authority and direction in a simple resolution and put this matter up to a referendum. I think you owe it to the people. I don't think it can happen before whatever deadline is agreed to. There are some things that are just a lot more important than even losing an important deal. And I think one of those things is if you promise something to the public, you really need to deliver on that. And that is, let's have a transparent process, as much information as early as possible posted on your website. And number two, if you said you're going to have a referendum, by golly, I think you'd need to do it. So that's my final piece. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Neil. Thank you for coming in. Any other discussion this evening? Sam?
So Sam Ogie, 1924 Clark Road. Perhaps the town board could remind me when they promised that they would have a referendum.
Thank you, Sam. We did not promise.
Okay. I understand it was an intent that there would be
Every intention.
opportunity for town residents to speak, and I would just like to reiterate what I said before. Town residents have spoken at multiple meetings, on surveys, online, over a period of 2 years. So to say that we have to throw things out of whack in the final 60 days of a 2-year process, I think it's not fair to the town board to suggest that they're breaking faith with the voters or doing something that certainly sounds the way it's being presented as underhanded or lacking in transparency. That is certainly far from the truth. I'd also like to just point out that if you don't buy this land, we know what's going to happen to it. What's been going on in Webster with the golf course there. You know, I'm sorry I didn't have this to comment on earlier, but Mr. D'Amico of Combat and Construction says in an article in the Democrat and Chronicle that he put an offer in on the land. And he says nobody likes development. They're not going to like it. But everybody wants me to build their houses, essentially. And this is a quote. "We had a conceptual plan for the land in Penfield, but the town wouldn't accept it. Now the town's trying to negotiate a deal to purchase the land for what we were going to buy it for. If they can get the residents to put up the money, then they can have it. But my guess is that they won't be able to, and hopefully I'll end up with it. If you don't buy the land, we're going to have 250 to 300 Ryan homes on that property with everything that goes along with it. And I'm very happy that tonight you have disappointed Mr. D'Amico of Combat Construction and made the residents of Penfield very happy. Thank you."
Excuse me. Thank you, Sam. While there's some others that may want to chat while you're thinking about that, I have two comments that have come in, one from resident at 4 Woodside Drive. I appreciate the work the town has done. I would hope future plans would consider wildlife and leave some as meadows, no trails or grooming. A resident from 26 Thorn Tree Circle. I see no reason to purchase this property with no purpose in mind. I look forward to it being developed without my tax dollars as zoning permits. I expect it to be able to vote against this without going through a petition process. Other comments, discussions under public participation? Okay. Seeing no further comments under public participation, the November 20th, 2017 meeting will stand adjourned. The next legislative meeting of this board is scheduled for December 6, 2017 in this room. I'd like to thank everyone that participated this evening. I wish everyone and their families a wonderful and safe Thanksgiving holiday, and thank you to Penfield TV.